Good morning if you're in the US, I should say. Good afternoon if you're in Europe watching. I'm Aubrey Bergauer, and I am joined today by an exciting guest who I'll introduce you to in just a moment. And I'm trying to make this countdown go away in the corner of my screen, and I don't know what I'm doing wrong. There we go. Okay, so if you've been following me the last couple of weeks, I have been in Berlin speaking at the Deutsche Orchestra conference. In just a few days, I head to Hanover, and my guest is joining me from Yorkshire. So we're all European today. So if you are watching from over here, welcome. If you're watching online later, no matter where in the world you are, welcome. We're just so glad you're here is the point. And if you don't mind, leave a comment in the chat if you're watching. We want to know the chat is working. Leave a comment where you're from, say hello, whatever that looks like for you. We'd love to hear from you. And of course, as we get going with the stream today, if you have questions, also use the chat for that, because we'll definitely have time later to take your questions, and I'll keep an eye on the chat as we get going here. So as an introduction, I started a series earlier this year called The Narrative is Changing. If you've followed me for a while, I usually say changing the narrative. But the good news is in 2022, there are so many indicators that things are changing. Jeremy says hello from Colorado. Good, perfect. Okay, so oh, hi from Paris, another from Berlin. Okay, yay, yay, yay. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Boston, oh my gosh, all over. This is so exciting. Okay, the narrative is changing is what I was saying. And we have so many indicators in 2022 that is what's happening. So many things where slowly we are seeing progress in our industry. This is such good news for all of us inside the arts and culture sector. And today in particular, we are talking about content and influencers. And I started seeing the power of content way back in, oh my gosh, like 2004 or something, when I started, or 2006 maybe, when I started working at the Seattle Opera. I was responsible for a lot of content there. And fast forward to today, and content is king. And we're going to talk more about that and how we pair that with the people we work with, our artists. So I'm getting ahead of myself here. But what we have seen that I do want to say right now, and this is part of the shift in how the narrative is changing, what we have seen is that the shift in consumer behavior has gone from trusting brand content exclusively to no, now as a consumer, I trust individuals. And we know this because word of mouth is more powerful than almost any other source of information. That's why we have Amazon reviews. That's why we have TripAdvisor. That's why we have social media and the power of that. So word of mouth is important. That then parlays over the last few years into this idea of the influencer industry. And I have talked about this a little bit over the past few, I don't know, different online sessions I've given, talks I've given, and we're here today to hear from somebody who has really implemented this kind of strategy firsthand. We have a tremendous asset at our fingertips, so to speak, and that is the artist that we work with. So we're gonna spend the next, I don't know, 20 minutes or so talking about this topic. How do we empower, for an orchestra, the 70, 80 people that we have on stage to help be those brand ambassadors, be that word of mouth for us if consumers are trusting individuals over brands like the data is showing. So I'm gonna bring on here David Taylor. I'm gonna turn on his video and give a little introduction of him. And let's see, there we are. David, as we get going here, I just want to share with everybody a little bit about what your work and set up this conversation a bit. And then again, everybody keep using the chat. I love seeing all these different places. Everybody is from all over. This makes me so happy to see this. And one more thing I'll say to everybody watching, if you think this conversation is helpful to others in our industry, please share this. Share it now, live, share it later. We want to share this conversation with others. So if you think it's valuable, please, I invite you to do that. So, okay, back to our main event here. Here's what you need to know about David. David is named a Forbes 30 under 30. This is like alongside Dua Lipa, alongside Little Mix. And I just like envision like the list, and it's like Dua Lipa, Little Mix, David Taylor, like that's incredible. 30 under 30 here in Europe. And he has also been called an arts innovator by the BBC. He is a savvy digital marketer. Follow him personally if you're not already here on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram. I mean, he's all over it. And he also led the Yorkshire Young Sinfonia to be the first youth orchestra in the world to go 100% digital, meaning no sheet music. And I got to say, as an aside, this was always like a secret agenda item I had back at the California Symphony. How do we go all digital? And it just never was something we got to. And now I know David Taylor is the one who beat me to doing this. So I love it. I respect that. And now David does all kinds of consulting work in this area, digital marketing, being how do we be more digitally savvy as institutions? And that includes the project and case study we are going to hear about today. So welcome, David, welcome.
Thank you so much. And thank you for such a kind introduction. It's great to see so many people in the chat. Thank you so much for inviting me to be on. It's really exciting.
Good. Well, let's hit it. So I have several questions. I'm going to ask you these questions. We'll get through it. And then I'll say it again. If anybody is just more recently joining the stream, please use the chat to ask your questions as well. Comment along if you just want to cheer them on. That's allowed too. And then at the end, I'll circle back and grab some of your questions and bring them into the conversation here. So for now, first question from me is, I have talked before about this idea of influencers and brands using their talent. And specifically, I usually use Peloton as the case study for this. Anybody who took my comeback planning sprint last year has heard this. A couple conference talks I've used this case study. And in short, what they do is they don't say follow Peloton at the end of all of their workouts. They say follow me, insert instructor's handle. And that's what really started for me, spurring this idea of, oh my gosh, why aren't classical music organizations doing this with our artists? So my question for you is, that you've also used sports as an analogy. I've heard you talk about soccer teams, football teams for everybody here in Europe. And I love it. So with all of that, like, can you just say more about this? What was your journey to understanding all this? How did you get this idea? Tell us.
Very similar. And pre-pandemic, during the pandemic, I was having lots of conversations with the orchestras. And one thing that kept coming up again and again was that people come to our concerts because they love our musicians. And I always didn't really sort of sit well with that. It felt strange because we're so, as an industry, we're so bad at showcasing those personalities. 9 times out of 10, everyone on stage is a black and white tuxedoed anonymous blob. And even if you have a concert program with a list of all the players, there's very little chance you can match the name to the person. And then after the concert, there's no way of staying in touch with them. We don't know what their personalities are like. It's a complete anomaly. But similar to yourself, like looking at the world of sport and particularly soccer, but also basketball, NFL, rugby, all these other things, we know who all the players are in the first team. We also know the reserve players if we follow the sport. We probably even know the youth academy people. And that's not an accident. This is something which the sports teams have actually enabled. So each player has their own brand profile. They communicate in the way that works best for them. But it's through a series of media training, social media training, how to do a brand, how to market yourself. And that's a big investment from those organizations. But it's an investment that is done without sort of wanting a return initially. It could be done knowing the player might leave in 6 months if they're transferred. It might be done knowing they may not even talk about the team or not. And it may be done not knowing sort of if they even talk about the sport or not. So one of the big examples I used in the UK was a soccer player or football player called Marcus Rashford, who plays for Manchester United. And he used his big social media following that he got from playing for one of the big teams to not talk about soccer, but during the pandemic campaign for food poverty with children. And he got this huge campaign behind him. And off the back of it was in national press, and he got the government to change their mind not once, but twice. And through all of this huge media attention he got, Manchester United, the football team behind him, managed to bask in some of the glow. They were having relationships built at scale by someone who was powerful in a way that was really meaningful, that ultimately were then added to this ecosystem of building connections at scale. So that's why I became really fascinated about why that could be with orchestras. And then also in particular that this is a 100% the norm in sports teams of all levels and sizes and statures. And it absolutely should be the norm within our world as well.
Yeah, I love it. Oh my gosh, I love it so much. So, okay, let's dive into this case study then, because you did it. So, you worked to set this up for everybody. You worked with the Philharmonia Orchestra in London, and I mean, this is a pretty big brand. I think a lot of people probably know the Philharmonia. If you don't, their former music director was Esa-Pekka Salonen, who's now at San Francisco Symphony, where I'm normally based, at least based in San Francisco, and they brought you in to lead a project called the Orchestra of Influence program. So can you outline for us what was that scope of work? What was that program all about?
Definitely. So after having the big wild idea of like, wouldn't this be amazing? It then came down to the practicalities of how would you actually do this? And realistically, taking as much as I would love to take on 75 people in an orchestra at once, it's not feasible and it's too unwieldy. And also it's also about managing change and bringing people on board with that journey. So what we did is we came up with an initial project where it was taking on the early adopters from the orchestra, those who are really interested in sort of taking this further. And with it, developing a series of initial group coaching and developing a curriculum that would cover all the foundational bases of what they would need to know on their journeys. And this was decided on based on my experience of working with musicians of all levels, either music college, those in the profession higher up, those who are amateurs, all these different things, and seeing the common themes and trends. And then from there, after we had this initial group coaching, which was a mixture of stuff around entrepreneurship and creative thinking, social media platforms, websites, how to do blogging and podcasts, the technical side of things, how to create content, but more importantly, how to build your own roadmap was the final one. That eventually led them on to individual coaching where they could then take their ideas and run with them and work on them together. And this was the idea that they would do completely different things. No two people would be the same. Unlike some programs where you see it's like cookie cutter template social media training where everyone is exactly the same, we see it in record labels in classical music where you within 1 second you're like, oh, that CD release is definitely someone with this label because everyone sounds the same and it doesn't connect. This was in essence try and do things that are completely unique and authentic to them, that takes into account their preferred method of communicating, their passions, their interests, their skills, also their lifestyle, the amount of time they want to commit, all these other things as well. And so from there, all of a sudden we had 10 people who were both the musicians, but also some of the administrators being able to connect people at scale in a way that worked for them. And what I get really excited about is that normally if you were the orchestra social media account, you can communicate in one way at one time with one voice. All of a sudden with this, we now have 10 different ways of communicating with completely different styles, voices, and passions behind it.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. And you mentioned this in passing, but administrators could participate too, which I think is just very smart. I love it. So, okay. While I think many orchestras have probably thought about this idea in theory, to my knowledge, the Philharmonia is the first one to do it in practice. And so my question is, why? Why did they decide to do this? You mentioned this, how many musicians participated? I think you said 10 or so, I can't remember, but was the marketing department involved? Now I'm asking a lot of questions. Okay, why did they decide to do this? Tactically, who all was involved, maybe is the way to frame it.
Yes, so the difficulty with programs like this is it's bringing on board a lot of stakeholders within an organization. And I was very lucky with the Philharmonia that they were really keen on the idea. Originally, the decision maker, my conversations were with the chief exec, but also then including the marketing department and then offering it up to the musicians. It is difficult to instigate because it's such a radical idea for our industry that's outside our normal paradigm, where even though it is so prevalent in sport, it does take a big change. So they were the people who were sort of on board in this initial journey. With the musicians as well, it was being very open with them about what the process is. To be honest, the big thing that goes forward in this is trust, which is actually quite a difficult thing to manage at times. Every organization I've spoken to always has an us-them divide to some certain extent between players and management. So that's always something to be aware of. And if worst case scenario with this program, it went badly, it would turn up to you're wanting us to create content to sell tickets and that's not my job and I should be being paid. Fortunately, that doesn't happen. In essence, it is more this ecosystem of cooperation, collaboration, that everyone is better off the back of this. So ultimately, that was the vibe we got through it. And then fortunately with the program, all of it's delivered online. So that made it a lot easier to actually do in terms of practicalities. And we had 8 musicians and 2 administrators who were the people on board as part of this journey.
Okay, great. I think that's important too, that it wasn't everybody in the orchestra participated. It wasn't forced upon anybody. It sounds like, I think that's important to this kind of work. Yeah. So you mentioned of these different sort of training sessions you did. The last one was more about, empowering them to continue to go forward on their own, if I'm understanding this. But was that the idea, that musicians would just take this and run with it going forward, and the staff that participated? Or is the idea that they would still continue to work very closely with the marketing team? I guess I'm trying to, like, how integrated were these two things during the program and then afterwards?
Yeah, so it's 50-50, but ultimately the idea is they do whatever they want with this program, and they get to do whatever output they want, connecting different people, whatever their ideas are, that's what they do. So slightly similar to the example I used with Marcus Rashford, like food poverty probably wasn't on Manchester United's agenda, and yet that was the direction he went off and campaigned in. So it doesn't necessarily have to be charitable causes, but whatever passions they want to do, the way they wish to communicate, what they were wanting to discuss as part of their building a brand and profile and projects, that was entirely down to them. And during their individual coaching, there was a middle session where it was then including the marketing department to tie back in as sort of what this would look like if they were to be a curator of this content that's now being there, and also if then all of a sudden they were wanting ideas and what sort of themes could then integrate. But ultimately, it's there as a dialogue between the two parties, where in essence the orchestra invests in the musicians to do what they want, so hopefully they are strengthened with their individual outputs and projects, and they become more in demand, and it's good for their careers. And then in return, they're in essence building relationships at scale, which they're doing offline anyway. That's the one thing I didn't mention at the beginning. Where all musicians in orchestras will be doing teaching, chamber ensemble performances, lectures at conservatoires. Like, whether we like it or not, they are representing the orchestra outside of the orchestra. So it makes total sense to empower them to thrive to do it online when they could just do it online anyway and maybe not be as successful.
Yeah, totally. So, okay, what was the level of understanding of the participants, musicians and staff? Were they like the most social media savvy people that were like, yep, sign me up, or not? What was the baseline?
I don't think they will mind me saying, even though these were the early adopters in the cohort, they were probably further behind the curve than, say, freelance musicians and students. Two of the participants didn't have any social media of any form going into this.
Like,
so
no channel existed.
Like wow. Personal level, okay. No. And then on the flip side was one participant who was already very digital savvy, had been running live streams during lockdown in his own concert series. So there was a variety there, but I think I hope they don't mind me saying that some of them were coming at this with fresh eyes. And it certainly was a fresh approach in some circumstances. What is interesting, and this is both with the program, but also my other work as well, I reckon at most 25% of what I talk about is which button to push, at extreme most. 75% is how do you feel? And it's very much about your fears, anxieties. A really interesting theme was, I'm worried what my colleagues would think about me if I am being self-promoting. Is that I'm bragging? But equally, that was an interesting shared theme that then everyone then realized was sort of dispelled from talking it through, and also then seeing case studies. And Sarah Willis is a really interesting example at the Berlin Philharmonic Orchestra, someone who is able to sort of have her own brand and also run alongside the orchestra. But it was certainly a variety of levels and sort of adoption of the idea as well.
Yeah. Oh man. And then sharing insecurity, how vulnerable. That's amazing.
Yeah, that was interesting. It's using a tool called Mentimeter. So it's a kind of like PowerPoint where you can write responses and it goes onto the screen. So it's all anonymous, and it wasn't sort of like, here's a big fear. It was more like word cloud associations, getting as much of like this sort of actual open sharing out of the way as possible. So it's more themes and things that are not confrontational and too much. And luckily they're a very good trusting team as well. So they were great to really be quite open during the program.
Yeah. That's a good segue into results. You started sharing a little bit now, just some of these outcomes. So in the program metrics that you shared with me, I saw that before the program, let me make sure I get this right. Before the program, having a digital presence as a musician was ranked as a 7 out of 10. That's what they ranked it before the program started. Let me repeat it. Having a digital presence as a musician was ranked 7 out of 10 of like, how important is this type of question, I believe. By the midpoint evaluation, though, it was already a 9. So definitely almost at the top of the scale, even just by the midpoint evaluation, in terms of how important this work was to them. So what did you do or did they do to change this perception? Like, what, and I'm already seeing this in the questions here of like, how do we bring our musicians along to want this? I think that's sort of what this question is an indicator of a bit. So can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, certainly. So I think the pandemic certainly helped us like a breaker in our way of thinking. And prior to the pandemic, I have no way of proving this, but I think the rate of adoption would have been slower. So I think all of a sudden there was an acknowledgement that things have to be different. For context, the Philharmonia and the other three London orchestras are self-owned and self-governed, which also means their players are slightly more self-employed as well. So as a result of that, they are more sort of at the whims of the world and the pandemics. When things came about, they didn't have the security of being full employment, as did regional orchestras in the UK. So off the back of that, I think there was more of an awareness things had to be different. Interestingly, even though it was 7 out of 10 of importance, we still had people who didn't have personal profiles going forwards. But with it was very much talking about sort of what the outcomes would be like. There was certainly sort of where would you want your career to be in 3-5 years sort of conversations. And then off the back of it, how would it look like to get there? What are the journeys and steps on the way off the back of that? And also, as you can tell, I can talk for a long time as well. So I definitely chew that ear off the huge benefits of this going forward. One thing I found really helpful was actually saying this goes back to what I think is the origin of us as musicians. And that we actually had this weird 100-year specialization period where we had like a full-time job or employment and pensions. But historically, Mozart was entrepreneurial, Paganini was entrepreneurial. So with Mozart doing portfolio career of composing, chamber music, conducting, teaching, all these different things. Paganini, when he heard rumors about himself selling his soul to the devil, started dressing in black to play up to it. So almost at our heritage, having those examples to go back to was really helpful. Similarly, using modern day examples like Sarah Willis was also really beneficial to sort of, even if the conversation of me explaining it wouldn't be able to showcase something, actually having a person as an example was really powerful as a way of sort of transmitting that. And yeah, the halfway point was after the initial group sessions and only 4 individual coaching. So even though some were still on very much at the beginning of their journeys and their digital outputs, it was really reassuring from my side and really positive to hear that they were adopting the idea really well.
Yeah. So were there, actually, I know there were. I was going to say, were there top takeaways? Of course there were. So what were they? What were the top takeaways or findings from the program?
Yeah, so sort of around the things that were sort of unexpected. I think it was the majority of them hadn't thought about their careers and where they were going to be in 3 years' time, and then even less so on how they were going to get there. So even obviously the pandemic really throws that into light, which I thought was really fascinating. Equally, their level of confidence, even a short space of time, I wasn't quite expecting it to turn around that quickly. And also they were creating accounts and generating content that much. Even though this wasn't meant to be a big money-making project, a third of the participants had additional offers of work during the program, which was really reassuring and something I was not expecting. So all of a sudden, there's then a financial argument as to why musicians could be involved in this, because their own personal, professional lives are then enriched with actual work and money, which is always a nice thing to then go back to when it comes to why should you do this and why should you be a part of it. And then also, I think just in general, the interest in this as an idea as well, and that there's a real appetite for this as a concept going forwards. So I get really excited about this being hopefully a narrative that we can continue and find more ways of facilitating it.
Yeah, I just want to underscore what you said about the participants in the program started getting offers for additional work. This is classic content influencer results. This is, I mean, it totally matches up with why this industry of influencer marketing is growing so much, because it results in more lucrative opportunities. So I think it's a fantastic benefit.
Totally. And what I loved as well with this idea of everyone did completely different things, the work was seriously random. So at one level, we had someone who was doing masterclasses and workshops at a conservatoire. We had someone who got some work rearranging Rachmaninoff's Second Piano Concerto for DJ and piano. We had someone doing like the very typical influencer, going to restaurants and playing and sort of having influencer Instagram style content. And that was for a short period of time. And then other participants, one was writing about music and philosophy in French. Another created their own violin excerpt on demand platform, kind of like Netflix, but for violin excerpts. So there's a huge range of different things that came out of this. It was completely varied. So it's really fascinating that there's I wasn't expecting the results to be that fast of actually being able to sort of generate attention off the back of it that brings in something more tangible.
Yeah, I'm just like the gears are turning because I'm a big believer of like you put out into the world what you want to get back, and that's what happened. I feel like only among a group of artists could you have like such varied content that results in such varied offers for work coming back. I don't know. I love the range that came back. So let me, I just have one or two more questions. So everybody, if you have additional questions, please put them in the chat because I will get to that very shortly. So as I'm wrapping up my questions, for the administrators that participated, was their content and results similar? Was it different? I'm kind of curious.
Yeah, it was similar. Obviously, it will be slightly different what they were doing. It was mainly talking about ideas and concepts in the industry. Time seemed to be the biggest constraints on them as well, and I think particularly because they were employed to do sort of, I say 9 to 5. No one in the arts works 9 to 5, but full-time hours. It then became harder to create content off the back of it. So that was a particular challenge that I found administrators were hard to, and also in essence, it kind of narrows you down a very linear path of what you're going to do, which is in essence talking about ideas in the sector. So whereas on the musical side, there's a whole range of different things you could potentially do, it becomes more theoretical on the administration side, I think.
Yeah, yeah. So, okay.
Oh, and the idea of including the administrators, again, is to sort of saturate the world with the idea of the orchestra. So it's not just that it's the musicians who are the ones out there sort of showcasing the world. It's the administrators. And when we have LMP departments for learning and participation, or dementia, or all these other incredible elements to what the orchestra does, in essence, we are so much more than what we do on the stage. So one, saturating that narrative wider, but also on the conference side of things, and showing the orchestra as a place that people would want to come and work. So hopefully it's a lightning rod for talent to come and join the orchestra. So again, on the flip side, it's a big benefit of the admin side joining.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I say all the time, it takes all of us on stage and off to do what we do. So I love that so much. So, okay, as we're waiting to see if any other questions come in, was there anything that didn't work? I'm wondering, or anything that you would do differently if you did it again? I'm curious your response to that.
Yeah, I think trying to get more people in the organization to speak to and bring them on board, which is always a challenge with times and constraints and everything. So for example, the halfway meeting, bringing on the marketing team, for me, it was the first time meeting some of those people. And so it was very difficult for them to have like a flash through of what the program was, the ideas, the goals, and just me sort of blurbing out in 5 minutes and desperately hoping they come on board on that journey. And it was great that they were really enthusiastic, but from my side, I would have loved to have had that conversation earlier on, and also hopefully to bring them on board on that journey and include them in part of that process. So I think the more people in the organization who are aware of it, that'd be really fantastic. And I think as well, hopefully having more of a springboard at the end of it. So it's then, in ideal world, it's a cohort of 10, then a next cohort of 10, and the next cohort of 10. So instead of it being like a standalone project, it's almost an upward spiral of all these different things. And just going back to your idea of unexpected successes, the orchestra were doing a residency at Garsington Opera in the summer, and the participants were using their car sharing journeys to then bounce ideas off each other during the time as well. So all of a sudden there was a sort of more of an environment of this being a conversation and something that was the norm, rather than that violinist over there is doing self-promotion and that's bad. It became much more open, which I was really excited about.
Yeah, good. Okay, question here from Jeremy. Jeremy is asking, what next steps would you suggest from what you learned here? So what would come next, such as how could smaller orchestras or individuals implement these lessons?
Brilliant question. The good news is that the actual program itself is completely usable at any organization side. I think there's actually really interesting benefits for smaller ensembles. So with them, when they're usually on tour, there's no chance for a marketing person going around and actually being a part of that journey. So actually having the musicians be a part of the ability of creating marketing content when they're on the road is a hugely powerful thing that can really tie in as part of that, and also significantly cheaper than bringing on a full-time member of staff to facilitate that. And that's actually a conversation I'm having with a few ensembles at the moment of how it could look like for them. On the individual side, it's very similar. That is part of the journey, which segues wonderfully into something we're going to mention at the end. They've actually launched this for individuals to sign up to in partnership with Adagio, which is called the Musician of Influence. And you can find out about that on my website as well, or davidtaylor.adagio.com, I think. I'll put that in the show notes or a comment at the end. So yeah, there's all these lessons. In essence, it is about individuals defining their own journey. So the actual size of the orchestra, or if they're individuals, doesn't necessarily matter. It's more how I then tie it into each individual organization's needs in those group sessions that's sort of the nuance of that.
Cool. So this program with Adagio, just to plug it, individuals can sign up. Is that the idea?
Yes, this is purely for individuals. So obviously it's a shame that individuals can't make the most of these group learning experiences. Also the fact that sort of it brings the cost down on things. So if people are looking for a springboard in their journey, wherever that may be, this is to help both with careers and building a digital following as well.
Cool. All right. You heard it here first, folks. Let's see here. 2 questions, and then I think we're going to wrap up after that. So question is, this was done with a small cohort of participants. How would you, A, scale this, and B, get buy-in from traditionalists? Great question.
Very good question. So from running the cohort and also from doing other educational work and talks and workshops elsewhere, I reckon the cohort size can go up to 20 in practicality. And that's partly in terms of the size of the group sessions themselves, but also for the amount of time it then takes for delivery of the individual sessions. I think in terms of traditionalists, it's again showing what the result and the outcome is. I'm hopeful there's no awareness in the world, but it does certainly take time to bring those conversations around. One participant who was very enthusiastic about the program at the beginning of their journey was having conversations on the lines of, I'm not sure if I want social media to be a part of my output. So they were relatively traditional, and bringing them on board in that journey in security is part of it. I think the reasons behind the traditionalism are always unique, and that's why the one-on-one session is really powerful. And again, as I said, sort of 75% is how do you feel, and the reasons behind why people are not doing this as part of their journey are very specific to them. So understanding those are a huge important part of it. But I think as soon as, again, this becomes more of the norm, the organization becomes a part of it, there's an ecosystem of this, an environment of it, it's easier to bring people more and more on that journey. So hopefully it's getting critical mass along with it.
Yeah. I'll just add to that. I mean, I think it goes back to how we feel. I used to hate that kind of stuff, and I've grown up a lot, and now just see how much how we feel matters, whether that's our artists or somebody who is a traditionalist reticent to change, or somebody really gung-ho for change. It's how we feel is so important. So I just appreciate that you're saying that was such a 3/4 of some of this work is that piece alone. I think that's really it's really intelligent. So
definitely. And realistically, all the button pressing side is on Google. Anyone can Google it, but the hard part is actually then like, how do I feel about it and what's right for me, and all the things that come inside of that. So actually it's that side's the way forward.
That's so true for so much of our work in this space. I mean, it's just yeah, it's very emotionally intelligent. Okay, so we're up on time. Any remaining questions? Dave and I will go back through the chat later on LinkedIn, and we can try to comment if we didn't sufficiently answer. I see John dropped in the link for the Adagio course, so perfect. And
can I just take one of the questions? I think it was really interesting.
Yeah.
It's one from Jeff about how do you present the benefit to musicians and what was their compensation. So for with this, there's no compensation, but the idea is that it's the orchestra investing into them for the sake of them being invested in. So they don't have to do anything for the orchestra necessarily. It's to basically provide them with training resources that they succeed. And hopefully that level of trust and cooperation is then what builds this to go forward. So there's never sort of you get paid £50 per tweet sort of thing or plugs. It's more to, that the orchestra is seeing the value in the players, and off the back of it, it's a hope that they invest in the experience of the project.
Okay, good. Yeah, I thought we had covered the benefits, but the payment, thank you for coming back to that. Okay, for the sake of time, we are going to wrap up. So I just want to say thank you, David, for sharing this with us. I'm just so glad that you are out there doing this, leading the way, have a case study now to present, or doing this on another platform with Adagio. That's so wonderful. And I want to thank all of you watching. We had a lot of people register for this, and we always see more people watching after the fact. So I'm just so blown away by how many people were interested in this particular topic. I think that shows how important and relevant this work is. So really excited for that. And just some closing thoughts. We already plugged the Adagio course. I also want to mention on the administrative side, if you want some training this summer, I've got my summer up level, also an online course. That's on my website if you want more information there. Coaching, mentoring, group coaching. How we feel is going to be part of that too. You better believe it. And lastly, again, I want to invite you, if you liked what you heard today or you learned something, please leave a comment, leave a like, please share this in your feed with others if you do think this conversation is valuable to bring to others in our field. It makes a big difference when these streams get shared. And lastly, follow us if you're not already. David and I were chatting offline before this started, thinking, wow, yeah, our followers we think are really like a non-big overlapping Venn diagram. So please, if you like what you heard, give us a follow if you want more content like this. And I just love connecting with you all on this channel. And I know both of us have a lot more projects up our sleeves that we'll be sharing in the coming weeks and months. So with all of that said, thank you all once again. And I just wish you all the best as the narrative is changing at our organizations and in our field. I just could not be really more excited for the time we're in right now as an industry. So with all of that, have a great day, evening, wherever you are in the world. It was a total pleasure. Bye, everybody.